Welcome to Tramlines, a podcast from Agrii. I'm your host, Tony Smith, putting your questions to the experts. Today we are live at Cereals 2024 with Agrii's John Miles, Seed Technical Manager, Gavin Taylor, Crop Input Specialist and Farm Safe Seed Coordinator, and Rob Stuart, Crop Input Specialist and Seed Specialist. Welcome to Cereals 2024 and to the big discussion, planning for this autumn. What varieties to sow? Certified and farm safe seed? And what else needs to be considered to build resilience into the next cropping season? Perhaps you can set the scene. What is the conversation that needs to happen right now? John?
Planning for the autumn.
Yeah. And when it comes to seed, what are the key elements that we really need to think about within that planning?
What do you want to grow? Where are you going to grow it? And how are you going to get that seed?
Right. So that source of supply of seed is going to be really important, isn't it?
Yeah, everybody's had a tough season. Seed of certain varieties will be short, so you've got to engage with what you want and actively go and get it. And if you haven't and you got it on farm, then that's possibly a bonus this year as well.
Yeah. And Gavin, from a farm safe seed perspective, is that the same planning that needs to go into play?
It is, absolutely. We need to be thinking about when you want those seed dressed and getting those decisions in place now. They don't all have to be firm. That's the benefit of farm safe seed, that you don't have to make all your decisions right away. But if you're going to farm safe, we need to be looking at what those fields look like now, making sure they're as good as they possibly can be for a fresh start next year.
Sure. And Rob, we're here at Cereals. It feels like a really vibrant event given the challenges of this autumn and spring. But what are the key questions, the big questions that farmers are asking you here on these variety plots?
The bigger questions, I suppose, what is coming to us today are the varieties, what's new, what should they be looking out for, and what could they utilise on farm, especially coming out of a very challenging autumn and again challenging spring so far.
So John, from that point of view, where do we start with that planning process? What's the mission critical decision to start to get into place?
What do you need to change, really? As the guys have said, really challenging spring, lots of disease of yellow, brown and septoria. So, what is potentially, one of those 1 in 20, 1 in 30 sort of catastrophic years for all the diseases. People have really seen how hard it is to look after them in that worst case scenario and decide, well, that's too much for me, I need to change that. Obviously it'll be an expensive year to grow. There would have been, a lot of challenges in terms of application and gaps and things that won't have worked well, and people probably are going, right, well, if this is worst case scenario, I'm not wanting that again. So I think it's probably, what is kicked out of the farm, what is perhaps what is wanted to be brought in, and also, with milling premiums where they are, soft wheats coming to the market with £7 or £8, premiums, and no discernible drop in yield from feed wheats. There's some opportunities to do something different.
Yeah. Is this going to be potentially a really busy year for farm safe seed, and why, Gavin?
I think it's absolutely. I don't want to get caught out, and we have a bad season, but I suspect, and we're projecting that we will have the busiest year we've ever had on farm safe seed. Some of that is the quality and having to put more through. We're unsure of how much seed's left on farm from last autumn, which was challenging, obviously. That'll depend regionally, but we will be very, very busy. So we have to prepare for that. Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. So Rob, where is the fit? I mean, of farm safe seed alongside certified seed, and why is that going to be particularly important to get that fit right for your farm this coming year?
It's a quantifiable thing to answer really there, because all farms are different. Some people, it's the rotation, I suppose. As well as that, it depends on what the crops on farm are looking like. So if you've got poor looking crops on farm, you're probably going to be more inclined to buy certified seed. If you've got seed that's going to make the grade on farm, then again you could be looking at the cost saving exercise of farm saving, especially with the challenges that have been faced on farm this season. But again, it's down to each individual farm and where they are in the rotation and working that plan out on farm.
So John, in terms of that planning and getting things right, it's not just about seed, is it? Here we are in Hertfordshire, blackgrass country for many farmers here. What else do we really need to consider and get right?
So for me, the key considerations around moving to this autumn are, as you mentioned, the traffic light system, which we've talked for many years around in terms of grass weeds. What is green, what is continuous normal, what is amber, need to modify our practices, and what is red, drastically change our practices. We'll probably have the same sort of traffic light system for soil structure, large amounts of rainfall, trafficking in wet conditions, mauling things in, a lot of structural problems out there to try and rectify. So actually some fields will be easily trafficable and, continue on and drilled again. Others might need some serious work. So I think we've got to think about how that plays out, and then that will affect our cropping plans and then the variety. And we've in our variety tours this year, we are basing our discussions around the blue chart, which is a part of our Agrii advisory list. And in here, it's an indicative graphic showing the logical sequence of varieties that you should drill. Not necessarily based on yield potential, but based on things like, everything you need for standing, for disease resistance, for grain quality. So some of those varieties that you'd want to start drilling with may be on farm in bags still, but that's possibly quite unlikely because they would have got drilled early and maybe lost. So that might be what you need to go to the market to buy, or indeed have on farm if you're lucky enough. And then obviously moving on, there's a big tranche of varieties for later drilling. So I think the key thing is it's drilling the right variety in the right place. That's probably what we're trying to initiate. And then thinking, as you say, where are we going to get that seed? Do you need to go to the market for it, or can we get it through Farm Safe Seed?
How does that farmer make that decision between certified and farm safe seed?
I think ultimately it's an easy decision to make if you're comfortable and capable to deal with farm safe seed. It's an easy decision to make if you've got that variety already on farm, and if it's in good condition, there is no benefit to moving away from farm saving it. It's when you, as John says, it's when we're looking at situations where you might need a change. Just because it's been a bad year, it doesn't necessarily mean you need to change your variety. If you haven't got it on farm, ultimately you're going to have to buy something new and change it up a little bit. But if we've got it on farm, that's a really easy solution, and we can get a really good quality sample out of it, and you know where it's come from, and there's a cost saving, absolutely.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of making sure that farm safe seed is going to be good enough in terms of quality of seed, Rob, how does a farmer go about making sure that they can get that part of the planning into play?
So getting the right seed, making that into play, I suppose, it comes down to making the informed choices for the farm at hand. There's some older varieties still in the market, which are probably getting knocking a bit more this season. So stuff like Skyfall, for argument's sake, the Group 1, we know it's affected with yellow rust, but with that big wide drilling window that variety offers, it's something to consider, especially on the heavier ground that might not be the earliest to drill. Again, varieties like X-Days, it's got vigour, it's got the growth to habit to it. Yes, we're seeing a bit more yellow in it this year, that's for sure, but there's the growth habits that we like, especially on the heavier ground where you delay drill for blackgrass especially. People will look to varieties like that because they want them growth habits to go with it to get around their farming systems.
Yeah, very, very good, very clear. Let's talk about seed treatments, because seed treatments are really important, aren't they, from both certified and also your farm safe seed. So, John, what's the importance and role of these seed treatments, and why is that so important this year?
Establishment, Tony, and I think this year with the levels of blackgrass and the challenging and the somewhat ropey crops, establishment is key, and people might want to try and drill a bit earlier next year. And some of those conditions might not be that favourable. So, you need to look at anything that can help establish a strong young plant. And certainly for us, seed treatments, fulfil that role. That early plant health, is quite critical to disease. A lot of people are talking about, lots of rust, and we do know the role of manganese within rust. And actually, we see really good results year on year for decades now on the role of manganese seed treatments within not just establishing a crop but making a strong young plant that is more resilient. And resilient is a huge word these days when it comes to cropping and farming and all of that jazz. So yeah, for us, I'd say the manganese type of things. I mean, we've talked, haven't we, before in terms of promoting testing of seed prior to, so you can actually address your chemical, your nutrient loading for the seed that you've got.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of, it's not something that's really taken off widely, to be quite honest. But with specifically to farm save seed, there is an option to test your grain for nutrient levels. We have solutions like manganese, like copper, zinc. So we can get those, and if you are farm saving that seed, that is a really viable option which you can talk to us about. It hasn't taken off, and we would like to encourage that, because then it's prescriptive, rather than just putting on something that someone's told you is good.
And value for money. They're not. We're not talking stuff that's adding pounds and pounds and pounds per hectare, and actually, as I say, over decades of work, we can show the value of the manganese and the zinc and the copper, if needed, on those seed treatments.
Why not join us at another upcoming event near you to meet the team and discover more about our services? Visit agrii.co.uk/events. Let's just come back to what varieties can we actually look forward to getting in the ground. What's exciting, John? You've always got a great positive story. So tell us, what varieties are you excited about in terms of what you've seen this year in this really difficult year?
Well, you know me, I get excited about funny things like varieties. This year's the disease, as we mentioned, it's like last year was astronomical for Septoria, but the rusts were largely absent. This year, with increased temperatures, the cloud cover at night has meant that we've not had cold nights. We've had the regular rainfall, not only helps Septoria, but also helps rust. This year we've got a full house, and there's not many people, even some of the older gentlemen that I've been talking to over the last couple of days, can remember, a year that has been so bad for these diseases. So, this year the variety picture is basically they've got to be good for yellow rust, good for brown rust, and good for Septoria, of which there isn't really very many, apart from Fitzroy. This is a perfect example of what we're stood in front of here. The programme across the site was okay, but obviously with hindsight, a bit like 2012, the more money you could chuck at something, the cleaner it would become. And there is disease in these crops, around about leaf 3 and leaf 4 and coming on to leaf 2. So the T1 timing, there was big pressure. And this variety Tapestry is a 6.3 on our ratings. It's reasonably clean, but there's still a good bit in there. You look at Fitzroy, which is a pet favourite of mine. It is super clean, and we give that a 7.6 for Septoria, and it shows. So yeah, I think things like Fitzroy is for me an absolute no-brainer this year, and I'm really glad that we have it in our portfolio. There are others that are standing up. Things like Dorsum. Okay, the brown rust resistance on that is pretty good, so that's sort of seeing that through. Oxford's another variety which again covers bases, quite nicely, and that one's looking quite good. Palladium, Ultimatum, and there's some of the candidates are suffering a little bit, but some of the others are looking quite good. And there's things like Goldfinch, which is RAGT's new potential bread maker with BYDV resistance. Coming off of that illustrious background, that looks really clean as well. So I think, of course I would say this, wouldn't I? A good year for disease is a great year to engage in variety choice.
Yeah, and in fact last year you were talking about, actually with reference to lodging, how last year that lodging pressure showed up those differences in varieties last year.
It's not over yet, Tony. Come on. This is the problem. I think everybody on the first night of cereals was thinking, please let's have these 50-mile-an-hour winds. Because, the things like the barleys and things are quite big crops. So we could still get some of that extra stuff. I just personally hope we don't.
Sure, fair enough. Okay, so Gavin, let's talk about the farm safe seed from that perspective, in terms of what does the farmer really need to think about in terms of making sure they can get the dresser on the farm, and what varieties they're going to dress?
Right, so there's a couple of things we're stressing at the moment, which is taking care of the crop that you've got in the ground now that you know. Make a choice on what you've got. If you're going to farm safe, you make that choice now. Take good care of it. Prioritise harvest and make sure it's clean and ready to go. The next part of that is to make sure you're speaking with people within farm safe seed kind of now, and in the next month or so, well before harvest. Set a preliminary date. That we can all work together. If we are late to that, much like it is with a challenging spring we've just had, if you make that decision too late, you're on the back foot, and you can often have a long waits, which we all know the temptation is going to be to get in early this year after a bad autumn, obviously. So if you are waiting, you could be well into October before a seed dresser shows up on your farm. So if we're organised and we plan now, we can get ahead of that.
And I gather from talking to all three of you, you almost can't stress that enough.
Absolutely, we can't stress it enough. We're trying to be proactive. There's only so many hours in the day I can try and bother someone in June to book up a mobile seed dresser. They don't really want to talk about it, but we have to stress it. We know how busy we're going to be. We've got the same pressures as everyone else, which is it's men doing the work, and they've only got a certain amount of time in a day to get that work done. So we have to do that. And I'd also say the other opportunity there potentially is to look at if you've got anything from last year that's still in the barn of a decent quality, and I stress quality. It's not just you've got that variety and it's okay. We need to get it tested. We need to get it tested early and make sure it's of a good quality. But that could save any queue. We could be with you in July or early August, dressing your seed before you're harvesting. So that is an opportunity. It won't be for everyone, but that is an opportunity for someone. Absolutely.
And Rob, I've heard you giving so much advice to farmers, about picking the right varieties. How do we start to bring this together in terms of, the conversation about really shaping up that planning, pulling that together so that we can build in a degree of resilience that John was talking about?
So again, it's scenario dependent. Geographically speaking, the area where I'm from in the Midlands, we're probably mixed family farming. We do have a lot of heavy clays around with us. There's a lot of seed that has been left in the sheds that hadn't managed to get drilled from the autumn, in particular varieties such as X-Days, which have got that vigorous growth behind it. Farmers there will delay drill to get on top of the blackgrass, and of course what happened into the early part of October, it started raining. That rain obviously didn't stop, and as a result the clay got wet, so you couldn't drill. So I'd mirror up to the advice what Gavin had given. Get in there, sample that grain early, but then on the flip side of that, to bring in more resilience, you're going to start looking at the more earlier to drill varieties. So there's some all-time favourites like Graham, for argument's sake, very early driller. It's a combine friendly variety, I'd say. It always seems to yield. It's a consistent high yielder, obviously a first wheat more so than the second wheat, but you could take a step back to look at them earlier drilling varieties to bolster the seed what's already on farm, taking into account if germinations drop slightly and you need a bit more seed, look at an earlier to drill variety.
Just to bring this podcast to a close, what is the prime message you would like growers to take away from today here at Cereals 24? John?
Probably it's attend open days. I know it's a bit of a depressing sort of thing at the moment in terms of things not looking very good, but actually you're not alone. There's quite a lot of us that look out on fields of wheat that we've had to spray off and wish we'd have done a better job. I think, there's a lot of camaraderie I've felt in the last couple of days. A lot of, don't worry, my situation's worse than yours. So I think that's a benefit from attending open days. And also, as I said last year, Tony, coming and looking at varieties and seeing what there is that could work for you.
Yeah. Gavin, what would you add?
For me, it's the benefit we've got is that it's a brand new start. There's no telling what the weather can do any given year, obviously, as we've just had. But we have got an opportunity to start. We need to start early by planning and making sure we're making all the right decisions, or the right decisions for our farms. And I would say we have a chance to be more positive.
Rob?
My final bit of advice would be use this event as a springboard. So you've come along, you've seen a lot of varieties, some of them are very interesting. Use it as a springboard in respect of, yes, you've seen it in all their glory, where they've been looked after to a high standard. Now, use that information, come along to our iFarms. It's the iFarm season now. Come and see the treated plots versus the untreated more locally to the individual farmer, and actually see what works in that area.
Well, thank you, John, Gavin and Rob, for sharing your expertise here at Cereals 2024. That's it for this podcast, but do tune in again as we meet the experts throughout the season, exploring the many immediate and longer-term questions for growers and farmers in the UK. If you have any questions that you would like us to ask the experts, email info@agrii.co.uk. See you next time.